if they continued to make music that wasn't mainstream afterwards? That's my question.
Okay, so the podcast I was listening to that was talking about this is The Ongoing History of New Music with Alan Cross, who's like the Canadian authority on like all things music. And his definition is it has to be only one song that brought the band to like listeners outside of their immediate fan base, and then like nobody followed them anymore.
So after
like
that,
so the example that he used was like Tub Thumping by Chumbawamba went just stupid international and used in everything, and they kept making music until like 2012 and had like over 20 different members, and nobody listened to them again because apparently they were a hardcore anarchist punk band other than that one song.
Everybody knows that one
I think
song.
that,
So then by that definition, if they are only then listened to by their major fan base, it doesn't matter. They're still a one-hit wonder.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like if you have a career and you're like supporting yourself with it, you're still like a professional musician. You're doing your thing. It's like incredibly hard to get there in the first place, and if you can stay relevant enough that like people will sign you and still do records. I feel like just because you're not on the radio anymore or like number one on like the like Spotify charts doesn't necessarily mean you're a one-hit wonder. Some people are one-hit wonders. Like you're right. There's examples like that one, Chumbawamba, where they just like fade. Or like literally nobody knows a song except that one.
Yeah. Like I'd say like you can still be a working musician, but like that's not the same as having like hits. Right? Like there's lots of bands that like you have your one big hit and everyone knows you for that and then you just disappear. Like Closing Time by Semisonic. Apparently they're still making music. The lead singer apparently co-wrote Someone Like You for Adele and it's just like rolling in cash. But like
it's not so bad.
Nobody knows that song other than Closing Time.
Well, it's like the is it Treble Charger? Like the lead singer is like a huge music producer nowadays.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
That's cool.
He was on that Battle of the Bands on Much Music. He found Stereos, another one-hit wonder.
How to tell?
That's kind of sweet, actually.
How to tell you're Canadian, right? Like how to tell you're Canadian is you mention Much Music instead of MTV.
I love the like Treble Charger Sum 41 arc too, where like Treble Charger took Sum 41 on as like a touring band or something because they liked their style, and then they got way bigger than them, way faster, and they got resentful and like hated each other afterwards.
Yeah, exactly.
But to go back, yes, Jody, 9 Days, crisp band. Even by today's standards, their last album, fantastic. And yet it sucks because like nobody's ever heard of it except for Story of a Girl.
257 Weeks is their best
so good.
track, I think.
So good. Yeah. I was actually really upset because they took a whole bunch of it off of Apple Music and like now I can't listen to it. Yeah. All right, well, let's talk some tabletop. Our first topic tonight is nerd culture. What do you guys think? Nerd culture nowadays. It seems like it's everywhere. I don't know.
I think it's really hard now to distinguish what's like nerd culture and what's just pop culture because they've kind of blend together. Like you have like superheroes are now just like the biggest selling movies. Everybody knows the Avengers, even if you're like, I'm not a nerd. Like, my wife would never say she's a nerd, but she loves all the Marvel movies. And like everyone's a gamer. Everyone plays some kind of game, even if it's Candy Crush on your phone. I don't know if Candy Crush is still around or not, but I think it's really hard to distinguish the two now.
Yeah, I agree. Like Jesse's parents watched The Boys before I did, and they're like 60 and 70. So that says something, right? Like, what would I agree with you? Like, what is the separation line? Like, only the most niche of nerd things can even really be outside of most people's comprehension now, right? You can say things and they'll understand, right? You try and explain a video game to someone 20 years ago, and some people wouldn't even get what you're saying. Now anyone will understand, even if they've never played even a remotely similar game.
You know, Jody, I always remember this story you told me when we were kids, and it was that your uncle, who hadn't seen a video game since like the original Atari or something like that, walked in on you playing Final Fantasy and was just blown away that you weren't watching a movie.
Yeah. During one of the CGI cutscenes. I know that in my lifetime, I went from living in a world where you get bullied for playing Game Boy on your lunch break to now I feel like you get bullied if you didn't play your Game Boy on lunch break.
Well,
you know what I mean? Like, it's everywhere, and like part of it I think is because it's just everybody's realized it's fun. Like, there's some kind of interest you can find in nerd culture wherever, like, no matter what else you're interested in, you know.
And this is a casual observation that I myself have made, you know, just interacting with youth, and it's that kids don't get bullied anymore for liking certain things. And, you know, video games are cool for everybody. Like, even the most popular girls will play, you know, whatever the latest is, whether it be Apex or Fortnite or something like that. And you're right, Jody, that there seems to have been some sort of evolution from when we were kids, which, you know, I say this every year that it wasn't that long ago, and it gets further and further. But, you know, I remember, you're right, you got made fun of. Oh, you play Pokemon? You play Mario? Like, nerd. And it was hurtful, but it doesn't seem to happen anymore.
I feel like there's kind of been a shift from, like, bullying kids for being nerds to now, like, gatekeeping culture. So now it's not like you're a nerd, it's you're not nerdy enough. You say that you're a comics fan. Well, I want you to tell me, like, what was Moon Knight's first appearance? And, like, yeah, there's been this weird shift now of, like, and, like, even, like, you know, you talk to kids and you're like, oh yeah, I play video games. Like, do you play Fortnite? So, like, even, like, they feel the need to, like, gatekeep of, like, oh, you're not really a gamer. Like, listen, buddy. Like, yeah. I wonder if the reason why tabletop role-playing games haven't really blown up in the same way is just, like, the barrier to entry, right? Like, you need to not only know what books you need to buy, you need to read those books, you need to understand the system, you need to then go and buy more books, find enough friends that are willing to play with you. It's not enough to just have one buddy who wants to do D&D with you. And I wonder if that has kind of made it less accessible for, like, the new generation of nerds. That, like, you kind of need some people to, like, either grandfather you in, or a group of people that are all like, this is what we do now. We are now tabletop role-playing nerds.
Come with me, we're going on an adventure. Yeah. Well, and you've really hit upon the whole point of this entire podcast that we've started here is there is a huge barrier to entry. And, you know, especially I think if you're looking at youth, we're adults who every year we have a little bit more disposable income than previous years, but it's still a large cost. It gets easier, kids. It gets so much easier. Life still sucks sometimes, but it gets easier.
I'm not sure that's true.
You know what? I'm a couple of years older than you. Give it a couple, you'll be fine. Yeah. But you know, to go back to that, is this idea that that's why we're doing this. We want to know which ones besides D&D are worth playing and which ones are not. You know, I kind of put it into the show notes of our first episode there. We are based almost on the philosophy of anything but D&D, and that doesn't mean that we hate D&D. We, like most pop culture nowadays, loves D&D, but there's got to be more out there.
There's also something to be said of how far it's come. Because, like, you know, video games came out and people were like, oh man, they're gonna, like, make kids violent. There wasn't, like, they're worshipping the devil like there was with D&D. Like, it was straight up satanic panic. Like,
yeah,
it's had to come a lot farther than video games have. Tom Hanks' first movie.
Monsters and Mazes. Listen, I feel like that's how you know you've made it, is you have Tom Hanks make a movie. I don't even care that he wasn't famous. He made a movie about how awful you were. Sign me up.
Parents.
Sign me up any day, okay? I will take it. Tom Hanks, gain some weight, you know, break your legs so you can be shorter. You can play me.
I bet you that made his career. You know, he won't acknowledge it probably now, but he's like, that's what got me in the business was that movie. That would be amazing.
Every time somebody brings it up and I see him, like, crying, being like, what am I doing? It's like, okay, come on. That's what I feel like when I fail my saving throw.
But yeah, there's, like, a lot of money in it, and we can't, like... discount that as like why it's gotten popular in a way. You know, it's a kind of a cynical way to look at things, but like when there's a lot of money involved in things and a lot of money to be made, it gets saturated with advertising to make sure that it's popular. And like, I don't want to say that that's the total rise of it, because people enjoy it, and that's why people started making the content. So like, it started in a really good place, but then a lot of it has been just pushed with really saturated marketing to make sure that like we all know about it.
I guess to go with a less polarizing direction with it, though, where I see the rise of it really comes about with social media pushing, and I hate to say this, but the echo chamber, because that is the bad idea, right? But the idea that we have found people we can connect with who have said, hey, no, this is cool, like this is awesome, you know?
Yeah.
And it might have started even with like things like Diablo 2, which was arguably the first really big multiplayer game that was fantasy. And I mean like multiplayer in the sense that people were actively coming together in LFG groups online to play through this campaign. At least, and maybe I'm historically wrong, but that is the one that I remember changing the game.
EverQuest.
I was just gonna say somebody's forgetting EverQuest.
Yeah. You're right.
But I don't know, Diablo
and
was like
yet-
a different experience that actually had like a really strong pull in like a more condensed story that like kind of brought it to the forefront, and it was a lot easier to get into, I feel. So it was like a good port of entry for people.
Yeah,
Okay, so-
again, it lowered that point of entry, because EverQuest was just this daunting, totally open experience. There was very little guidance in that game.
Well, and I think one of the problems, and one of the reasons why maybe I had forgotten EverQuest or decided that wasn't the one for me, was I remember that people talked about it and it was uncool.
Yeah.
And I remember people like hyping it up and kids laughing at them. But when people talked about Diablo 2, there wasn't that same reaction. Like, it was inherently cool in the same way that Doom was the cool shooter and everybody you knew was playing D2, right? And that's, I think, where my own perhaps inadequacies with this background of tabletop games, fantasy, stuff like that comes from, is because I was so nervous as a teenager to actually embrace things like this. Like, I wouldn't have been caught dead playing, you know, D&D as a teenager, which is, I think it's funny because Jody, you did play D&D as a teenager.
we
We hung
discovered
out.
it.
We never played it together though. And
That
you know,
stigma is like, that's a huge part of it. Why do you think it took me 16 years to play WoW and tell people I play WoW? By the way, Shadowlands comes out November 23rd. I'm very excited.
you hope.
Not that
They might
Blizzard
push it
needs the
again.
plug, but hey, Blizzard.
I was always pretty unashamedly like the nerdy kid. I've been like trading Pokemon cards on the playground since I was 6, like Yu-Gi-Oh duels
Getting
on the
Beyblades
park
banned
bench
from
in
school.
like grade
Yeah.
5 kind of thing. Like, yeah, I hated how negative the stereotype around it was, which is why it makes me really happy that it's not like that anymore. But it's also like there's a lot of like shovelware out there nowadays. You know, there's a lot of just like things that have this fantasy nerd exterior that are like really hollow on the inside that I feel like there wasn't as many of when it was less popular. There was like a certain quality gap, or like maybe just like a depth of the experience gap between like older games.
I feel
and
like the
newer
quality
games.
control. The quality control was that so few people did it.
It had to
that
be
those
good.
who committed to it were
Yeah.
good. Yeah, it had to be.
Yeah.
And that's my own experience of, you know, growing up is I in public would be like, nope, I'm not like that, you're a nerd too and I don't like you, whereas, you know, I'd go home and I'd totally do all the nerdy things in the background. You know, I remember going to your house, Jody, and you having all these fantasy books, and like we would talk about it, but I would always leave it on the shelf. I wouldn't borrow it because, you know, I didn't want to be seen with that. And it was really only when I went to college that I started embracing those things, because all of a sudden I was kind of like back to social media, finding people who were interested in it. And that's my experience. And even then, it took me until after university to start playing with a regular group. And then it was like, I was done. I was lost in it. And it's all I could think
Yeah.
about. You know, did you guys have, I mean, we've kind of talked about it a little bit, but did you guys have similar experiences there?
Yeah. So the first time I played D&D was with a guy that I worked with that I barely knew in Res. We went into his basement and we played, and they didn't explain the rules to me at all. I had no idea what was going on. The DM was super harsh. One of those, like, if you say it, that means you actually want to do it. There's no joking around. You don't get to jokingly say you want to do this thing. Like, you're doing it. And it totally turned me off from it. And I eventually, like, that's like how Jaden and I became friends, because I was talking about, like, hey, like, nerdy things. And, like, Jaden's like, yeah, nerdy things. And it was great. And they were like, guys, we should play D&D because my DM's a jerk.
I just want to say...
Jaden agreed to DM for me.
I just want to say that you take out the context of tabletop RPGs, and that story was so different.
I have something to add kind of on that, too, where it's like, I kind of, in some ways, miss, like, being part of the insiders group of, like, people that were into nerdy shit. And, like, like you said, like, you meet somebody else that was into it, and it was, like, kind of a rare thing, and you'd be like, man, we're going to be friends, we're going to hang out, we're going to talk about this, we're going to play games, it's going to be sweet. And, like, it was, like a thing. Like, it was, like, you were, like, part of a club, and it's, like, going back to the gatekeeping conversation. It's like, I'm against gatekeeping, but I miss feeling like being part of an insider's crew that were, like, into it and, like, knowledgeable of these things. And it was like, because when you're young, it kind of feels, like, cool in a way to be, like part of, like, an outsider group, you know? It's like punk rock. Like, D&D was punk rock once, you know? And it's like, I kind of miss that.
Those are my two worlds hitting together. It was the best.
Oh my god, did you guys just become best friends?
Yeah, you used to have hair, Kate. That's crazy.
I know, I did. I used to have hair. And dyed funny colors.
Yeah.
And, yeah. You're the only one here that knew me with hair.
Yeah.
I mean, I met
saw
you
me
one
with
time.
hair once. Yeah.
And then the next time I saw you, there was none, and I had no idea who you were. I actually wondered if over like the break they had fired you and hired somebody else.
And hired someone else.
Yeah. I was like, was that guy's name Cade? I don't remember. It's okay. Apparently you thought I was some 60-year-old haggard patch jacket wearing English guy.
You have an old man professor name. It's just
an old man professor style. Let's be
It's all I ever want.
Except for all
that's
the tattoos.
That's the life for me, guys.
That's not really old man professor. Old man professor Vietnam veteran.
I've seen some things. Jaden, what were your experiences with D&D and tabletop games growing up?
Well, yeah, like, not a lot. I grew up in a pretty rural, real country place for where I'm from, which wasn't a big deal. I had a good time. I actually really enjoyed it. The secret there was that you couldn't like anything too much. You could be pretty much into whatever you wanted. Like, everyone read, like, big fantasy books and stuff like that. That wasn't an issue. We all played video games. Some people mostly sports, but other people you could get away with whatever. Like, I had one buddy that we played Sims like every time we hung out till like 3 a.m. Like, I don't know why, but that was our shit. It was stupid.
Desperately trying to find the secret code that would get rid of the blur.
Yep.
Right? So we were all 10-year-old boys at one point.
Yeah, if only, right? We could have had that. And so, like, there was a certain limit, but nothing like tabletop. There would have been no way that would have flown too well. So I wasn't really into that shit just because I wanted to, hang out with people. And when you have 40 kids to choose from, and the 6 people that do that stuff are just too weird even for you, you just got to say that's just not part of my life at this moment. Because, like, they were just socially too far. It wasn't even nerdy things. It was just that socially you couldn't hang out with them. So, what do you do?
You know what?
They
It's
weren't
fine.
nerds, they were geeks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nobody wanted
You
to
know what?
hang
It's
out
fine. They didn't want you anyways, so...
Yeah, and they were good people. Actually, one of them was awesome. He was into real big punk music and had, like, all the most awesome punk vests. He had, like, 3 or 4 that were, like, wickedly done up. It was cool. But then, yeah, it was after university that I got into tabletop with Cade. just not after. I guess just during, right at the end of our university, we messed around with some Pathfinder for a while, and then did a little D&D, but none of it ever really stuck because the rest of our friends are super flaky.
It's literally the hardest thing about running games.
Mm-hmm.
But even that, even the idea, like that group, the Outcast, that's kind of what I was talking about with the EverQuest idea. And I will fully admit, because I think it's part of growing up, is there was that one kid who hyped it up, and we did not get along, and I was quite mean to him. And eventually he got back at me a few times, but it was definitely, as I got older, I made a point of finding him. Well, actually, I just happened to come across him in, I think, the grocery store, and we kind of started talking awkwardly, and I just came out with it. I was like, you know what, man? Like, I'm so sorry. Like, we were not nice to each other. I was not nice to you, and it was because I was so insecure about wanting to like those things and not wanting people to realize that I like those things, and it's just like a weird way of life that I'm so happy, like you guys are, that this stuff is accepted, and that also that I'm okay with myself now to like those things. Obviously enough to start up a podcast, which is pretty cool.
Mine's a great story because we dug up, we were cleaning a basement of a friend, and it was like atrociously dirty, and in a bookshelf in the back corner we found the like first edition D&D player's handbook and then a D&D for dummies book. Like, it was like treasure buried in this dark, dingy basement, and like we took it upstairs and like read it over and like improv'd our first session, and we stayed up to like 4 a.m. with our buddy and his like older brother, that it was like his book, so he kind of taught us how to play, and we just like killed werewolves till 5 a.m. It was great. We were like 16 at the time. Yeah.
Kate, to go back to your conversation that you had this DM who was like ruling with an iron fist, and I mean, obviously there comes a point where you had to have questioned, was this game for you? Were the rules too strict? Like, how did you turn that around?
Well, I said something stupid, and he made me roll to make it happen, and it did. And I was like, I can do anything. Yeah. Because the stupid thing I said was, hey, I'm a dwarf. I have a big beard. I should probably have extra carrying space, right? Just shove stuff in the beard. And he's like, roll for it. Because, all right. And I nat 20'd. And he's like, fine. So I had like 5 more pounds of carrying capacity because of my beard. And I'm like, oh my god, the possibilities are endless. No. So yeah, that was when I clicked with it. But I was like, this guy doesn't run the kind of game I want to do, because I want to be able to do silly stuff occasionally and be an idiot, and because that's fun to me. So
did he just like run the rules so strict as to what they were, or was he maybe even using the rules too aggressively?
I think a combination of the two. I got the sense of the guys that he was playing with, because I got brought into a group that had already been playing for a while, and he made it seem like he was going to be like grandfathering me in, but it was definitely like the other guys goofed around too much for this DM, and he had like put in this like, no, this is how it's going to be, because we need to finally finish a campaign, damn it. And he was just frustrated with them, and then it was very much like, you rolled for everything. There was no like, okay, yeah, like of course I can, climb this wall. I'm a thief. That's what I do. It's a 5-foot wall. I, as a dumpy college kid, could climb that wall. It's fine. And he was like, nope, you have to roll for it. You have to climb. And I think it was just his way of trying to gain back a little bit of authority over a group that had questioned it enough times, and I just came in at the tail
I know
end of
that feeling a little bit. But I do it with enemies that almost kill them. I'm a mean and vengeful god.
It becomes a good conversation of, can you just do it because you see that it's easily done as a metagamer, or as just like yourself, or should you be rolling for absolutely everything? And this can get kind of controversial.
I say, and like with all things, that like it really depends on the situation. Like, if it's in a setting where they're not crunched on time and there's nothing distracting them, and it's a simple action, and like it's not meant to be a puzzle, I feel like it's better to just like move the encounter along. But then on the flip side, if it's ever a time when there is danger or something that's like pressing them for time, then like you have to do rules as intended, because like that's not a situation where you could plausibly say like, okay, they just take their time and do it extra carefully and make sure it works.
Yeah. If you don't have enough rules, you're not playing a game
Yeah.
anymore. You're just doing improv in your basement.
And it's like, that's why I love the rules of tabletop games, though, is because it's like, it's all just sort of laid out for you in terms of like what to roll in certain situations. But then there's somebody controlling the game that gets to like curate it. They're like a DJ at a party, you know, like if the mood is like tired of puzzles, they can let you like get through the next door without having to do the puzzle. If like the mood is we're tired of killing things and need some like interaction, then you can make the next like section have more puzzles. And yeah, like I feel some people don't like, they either don't want to make the call or they feel like they're wrecking the game when they like use different rules or like override the rules. And it's something that like you just have to really, if you want to run games, kind of get good at like knowing when to make the call and just like progress it, or like then on the other hand say no when like they've started to like get out of hand with what they're asking you to just let them do.
Yep.
Well, I feel like this is a conversation or a struggle that we had recently this past summer when we played Call of Cthulhu, and you know, I had run a campaign for you guys, or a few of you, that was based around the original Resident Evil, taking the first game and the map, particularly the Spencer Mansion, and adapting it into Cthulhu mythos. And I guess from my perspective, I was trying to match up a video game with a tabletop game, which is just inherently difficult to begin with, because video games are very visual and tabletop games are not, especially Cthulhu. And so there became points where I know that you guys were a little bit frustrated that I was making you do tedious things, you know. Our friend James infamously saying, like, well, I'm just looking at a bookshelf. I can't just look at the bookshelf. And it's like, well, in my head, that bookshelf isn't just a bookshelf. Like, there is something about it. But I get where you're coming from. And I think I got better at it as we went. Particularly, I think, adapting that video game style. But it definitely was a disconnect, I want to say, between myself as a keeper and player.
I think part of it, too, is that it's like in a video game, you know how like you can only interact, you can only press A on something that is important, right? Like you generally can't, like in most games, just like interact with everything, and it's what lets you hone in on the puzzle piece, because you can only press A on the secret wall, so that's how you find the secret wall. And like in a tabletop game, if you have to roll search for everything that you check, then you never know if you're just rolling search to see if there's dust there or if it's a secret wall. Whereas when you say like James goes to the bookshelf and says, I want to look at the bookshelf, and you make him roll, that clicks into the brain that it's like, well, hey, there must be something more to this bookshelf. So when you use the rules in ways that are kind of like it's only when it's relevant, you know, then every time they come to a rule check, it can be like, well, hey, we're one step closer to the puzzle, and it's almost like dropping little breadcrumbs.
Yeah.
I'm still a big fan of the system that you and I discussed here a little while ago. That it's from an infamous Reddit post, but where like these guys were playing a D&D game, and the guy was like, well, I'll just throw our halfling party member over this chasm. I was like, well, could you do that? It's like, yeah, I mean, I think I could. Okay, let's go in the backyard and find out. And they pull out like a sack of potatoes, and the guy has to throw it and see how far he can throw it. I think that would be a hilarious like charity stream somewhere down the road, where it's just us in the backyard having to prove that we could do whatever physical actions in our scenario. I think that's hilarious, and I think we should do that at some point. But I do agree that like there has to be kind of a best judgment. Like you said, we're not going to be like rolling for search every 5 seconds for something, because A, that makes the game really tedious, and B, that's not realistic. Like sometimes things just like
Yeah.
pop out at you and you see them and you're not like looking for them and like trying to have things pop out at you.
And I think for myself, it came with knowing, and like before running that campaign where we were running consistently every 2 weeks for an entire summer, I had only run as keeper intermittently, once every couple months, maybe a couple times every couple months, and so it was really difficult to really wrap my head around some of the rules and when should they be used, when should they not. And I feel like by the end of that campaign, I really got it of like, hey, if there's nothing overtly hidden, don't make them roll spot hidden, right? Like, they can look at that bookshelf and say, what's on it?
Yeah. It was like a pretty like huge and bold campaign for the first like major one that you ran, and it was really good.
I'm quite proud of it. I hope to never run it again. But I will admit the end I was kind of just ready for it to be done, because it just went on for a long time, and there's only so many times that you can make running around in a mansion interesting,
Bottle
but this
episodes suck.
Nobody likes a bottle episode. Ahmed was right.
Back to the like podcast topic. I'm like very openly biased towards house rules and like DM says, I've always been like that because like from the very beginning of us playing, it was kind of just like us improvising it in a basement, and so like that's how we learned how to play. So that's how I like playing it. That being said, playing with you, I actually learned the values of rules as written. Honestly, about how it's like when you pull the trigger, you can't take that trigger pull back. And like that's how it feels when you're actually playing strictly by the rules, where like you don't just get to like fudge the numbers and say things work. It's like it actually adds a lot of tension to it. I feel.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think for me it comes down to, if you don't like the rules, and those are the rules that make this system unique, why are you playing that system? Move on. Do something else. I think there are obviously nitty-gritty rules that you're like, okay, well, screw that. Like, chase rules in Cthulhu are often pretty... I guess I would say that they're awkward at best. Like, I think if you do them enough times, great, you'll get used to them. But you don't actually do them enough for them to matter. And so that's one that I'm like, well, we can probably just let this play out a little bit more naturally. But, when it comes to, like, sanity, I'm not going to change the way sanity works, because that's what makes Cthulhu original.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think it's finding that happy medium, because, like, a book can't read the room.
Exactly.
Right? Like, yeah. But, like, you need that framework to play within. Like I said, otherwise you're just brainstorming a story, and there's no like point to it.
And I think if you use house rules in like fun areas, or when it's like rewarding people for doing something really cool, that it like it just makes everything more fun, and it adds a touch of like your own personality and flair to everything.
Yeah.
The inspiration.
I think you could only really do it with like a group of players that you know. Like, if you're doing, like, a pickup game at, like, a comic shop or whatever on the weekend, you kind of have to play by the rules so that everyone has the same benchmark. Mm-hmm. But, like, for us, we all know each other now. But, like, yeah, we know that, okay, sometimes things are going to get a little bit fuzzy, and that's okay. We have an understanding already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that they're all just more powerful if they're used sparingly, right? Like, if you only take a few rules away, then it seems like when you are taking a rule away, it's really for a good reason, and people probably appreciate that more. Whereas if you're like, we're just going to scrap half the book, well, then who cares what rules got scrapped and which ones didn't and stuff like that. And if you add a ton of homebrew rules, then everyone's going to be too busy trying to keep track of both of what's going on, and then it's just messy. Whereas if it's a handful, then it feels kind of tailored, like you said, then you can really build the game to your table. But it doesn't take a lot to do that, I don't think. I think if you're going to try and be like, I got like 80 homebrew rules that I want consistently ran, that just is too much customization at that point. Like, you're just getting to nitty-gritty things that probably aren't going to make anyone happier.
You might as well write your own book.
You might as well just...
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, yeah.
Build a Kickstarter, get it funded, go to town.
Yeah. Hey, it works. Check out our next system in January. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and that's, I guess, my firm stance is just, if it breaks the system, play a different system. You know, there's a reason why people choose to play Pathfinder over D&D, right? They thought the system was too strict. They wanted something a little bit more streamlined.
I think like there's times where it could make the game too, though. Like when we first started playing D&D, it was like the stinginess of it, of the like loot and rewards and level up and stuff like that, are like gamer brains that love seeing all the plus ones when you level up. They weren't happy with like waiting 4 levels to like get an attribute point, right? So we like modified the system a lot so that we could like get more stuff on every level up, but you start like weaker. And I feel like it really helped us get into it. And like when you, like you were saying, when you have like a crew of friends who are all playing together and you like know each other and like talk and like make characters that are like just so tailored to like what they want and like really homebrew it and custom make it, it can like radically change how cool a campaign can be if you're going for the power fantasy trip. You know, if you want to have like the hardcore like tense games, it maybe doesn't work so well. But if you're just going into power fantasy, like I've had people play as like a demon that possesses objects that other characters use and can like cast spells as long as they're like wield them. And like character that was like a genie in a lamp that like was sort of neutral evil, but the characters would only let him out when he like would cooperate with them and stuff. And like it's super far out there and had to be custom created, but it made the campaign super unique too.
I think it's also cool, like when you have a homebrew rule, to like rationalize it in world.
Yeah.
Like, okay, we're going to change the way this is done, but here's why. It's not just because, like, we don't really want to worry about carrying capacity. Yeah. That's stupid. Just don't carry 12 battle axes. You're fine.
Well, and you know, even though I've said that I myself am pretty strict on the rules, going back to that.
What? You? No.
Listen, just because I'm 80 and yelling at kids to get off my lawn, it's fine. But you know, even going back to that Cthulhu campaign this last summer. We created custom classes for it and, you know, really tried to get a particular feel for it. And you're right. I don't think I would have been comfortable doing with brand new players or people who hadn't really played before. But I was confident that all of you kind of knew what you were doing. There were at times, though, that I felt like it kind of broke the game. Like, you guys had so many more skill points than you were supposed to. You had more body armor. But...
I was the best appraiser in the West.
to the credit, though, of, I think, working with you guys through that challenge, it was me going, okay, how do I make it harder without just increasing, you know, the bullet sponges of these enemies? How do I make that encounter particularly more deadly than it could be? Because they're not the average investigators we would have seen.
I think it worked really well in that Cthulhu campaign, though, because we had the preamble of like 3 sessions of playing normal Cthulhu where we were weak and couldn't do anything. And then like we actually got to be like the special forces assault squad that like could actually go in and handle the situation. And it felt pretty cool because it was so different from what we were used to in the system. Yeah, it was cool.
The first session, we surfed a crate down a cliff.
And blew it up.
Blew it up. Just to escape some rabid dogs. Like, whatever. Yeah, no, it's definitely an interesting challenge, I think, walking that line between house rule and the system. I know one of the most interesting debates about this that I've ever gotten into was